Hello and welcome to my top 100 Spectrum games, numbers 30 to 21. My number 30 game is Trans Am, and of course, Trans Am is another Ultimate Play the Game game. Anyone who's a regular listener or viewer to my channel will know that I'm a bit of a fan of Ultimate games. Ultimate released some of the best games for the Spectrum, and this was one of their very early ones. Their first release was Jetpack, and then after that they released Cookie, Psst and Trans Am. Now I'm not quite sure which order they released those in, or whether they released them all together. If anyone knows, can you let me know in the comments please? The object of the game in Trans Am is to collect the 8 cups of ACG. And in early Ultimate games, something to do with ACG often featured in the objective. So for example, in Attic Attack, you have to find the key of ACG to get out of the castle. And to do this, you zoom around America in your little dune buggy type thing, avoiding obstacles that kill you, refueling at the various cities that are around. I'm not sure how accurate the geography is of America when it comes to those cities. They look to be in the right places to me. New York's over on the right, San Diego's over on the left, Chicago's kind of in the middle at the top. And there are 2 baddies. There's always 2 cars, one of which is faster than the other. Now your car is actually faster than any of the baddies. It can go faster, but if you go at top speed, you overheat. And when your engine overheats, you're reduced to quite a crawl. And there's a point on the speed where it's just into the red, where if you hold it there, you'll be just about the same speed as the fastest baddie. You still have to avoid him though. And that's what I always do. I always get to that speed and hold it there. I have done a walkthrough of this game. I completed this game, and I think I said then, and I'll say it again now, that this is one of the games I used to play with my cousin. My cousin had this, and he was brilliant at it. He could complete it quite a lot. I've completed it myself, I've done a walkthrough, but I was never anywhere near as good as he was at it. Strange thing is, at the start we always had different tactics. He always used to head down towards the bottom of the map, and I always used to head up towards the top of the map. I've never known if going down towards the bottom of the map does in fact make it easier, but I just can't help myself. Whenever I start playing Trans Am, I head up. I head up, then east, then down a bit and then west, and kind of try and crisscross the map from east to west to find the cups. Now, according to the World of Spectrum website, this game was written by the Stamper brothers. However, I'm sure I read recently it was written by someone else. It was one of the Ultimate games that wasn't written by them, it was written by somebody else who worked for them. However, I can't for the life of me remember where I read it or who it was, so maybe I dreamt it. If anyone knows again, please tell me in the comments. One thing I really like about Trans Am is the scrolling. So it scrolls both vertically and horizontally. You get 8-way scrolling. I think that was quite unusual. It's quite difficult to do when you think about how you've got to move the memory around for the screen memory around. It actually is quite difficult. Anyone who's a programmer will know what I'm talking about. And there was no hardware help with scrolling on the Spectrum, so you had to do it all by hand, as it were. There is a kind of reduced window, so you're not doing it with as much memory and as much screen as you would do if you were doing the entire screen, but still, for a 1983 game, it's pretty impressive. So that's my number 30 game, Trans Am. My number 29 game is Mugsy. Mugsy was released in 1984 by Melbourne House. The interesting thing about Melbourne House is that they released a load of different types of games. They released Adventures, The Hobbit and Sherlock being 2 notable examples. They released, for me, what is one of the best beat-em-ups ever in Way of the Exploding Fist. They released utilities like Melbourne Draw. They released arcade games. They really were prolific in quite a number of different areas. The first thing that strikes you about Mugsy is the absolutely terrific graphics. I guess building on from The Hobbit, where they had full screen, quite detailed graphics, Mugsy came along and had these beautiful, huge kind of canvas screens. And over the top of them, speech bubbles would appear and ask you what you want to do. Now, I guess this is a strategy game, and I have said that my top strategy game was Football Manager, but that's lower in this list. I'm thinking about it now, there is another strategy game to come as well. Ah well, shows you what I know about even my own list. And it is a strategy game at heart. There is a bit of an arcade quality to it though as well, in that sometimes the man from Detroit comes in to try and assassinate you and you can have a shootout and see if you can kill him. The first thing I'll say about this game, gameplay wise, is that when the man from Detroit's coming in, your assistant, the guy who asks you all the questions, asks you if you want to pay some money to keep the good guys faithful. I'm not sure that this actually makes any difference on the game. All keeping the good guys faithful seems to do is lose you some money. Mind, then again, if you're going to end up in a body bag, you may as well kick some back to your faithful guys to keep them even more faithful. The game is played in years, and at the start of each year, you've got to make various decisions. Essentially, you're a mobster boss and you have clients to lean on. You can buy and sell clients, and each client will give you a certain amount of money every year. Some years are good, where they give you loads of money. Some years are a bit leaner, where you don't get as much out of them. You also have hoodlums, and you can recruit hoodlums, they can be wiped out, and they can also be wiped out by shootouts with the feds. You have to choose how much money to give your loyal hoodlums for guns and ammo. And it's pretty simple. That's about it. There's not a lot to the game. I think the impact of this game was the great graphics. And maybe the setting really caught my imagination when I was a kid, which is why it's so high in this list. Now, I love gangster movies. I love The Godfather. Once Upon a Time in America, I think, is one of my favourite films ever. But the gangster movie I was really playing when I was playing this game was Bugsy Malone. I was Fat Sam. I was Fat Sam making the decisions. When I was buying hardware, it was those splurge guns, those guns that shot kind of mini custard pies out of them that are in the film. The rackets were the sarsaparilla racket and the grocery racket, and I think that's why it caught my imagination. I loved that film. While I'm on the subject of films and gangster films, it was only recently I realised that the guy who plays Bugsy Malone in Bugsy Malone was also one of the gangsters of the Gang of Four who were in Once Upon a Time in America. Back to the game, and when you play this game, the gameplay is really good. The only way I've found to have a lot of success is make sure that you trade your clients very carefully. In good years, always put your extra money towards buying additional clients. And then in lean years, sell a few, but only sell as many as you need to. I think I used to play this game with either a pen and a paper to do quick sums or a calculator. Just work out how much you want to spend on guns and ammo. Every single one of your hoodlums requires a client to lean on of their own, and then it costs you £1,000 to lean on a client as well. I don't know what that £1,000 is for. Oh, you've also got to bribe the cops. You've got to do kickbacks to the cops to keep them off your back. It's a great game. It does just go on and on and on, kind of like a game of Monopoly. Eventually, you either do so badly that you guys desert you, or you will get shot by the hitman. And I must admit, early games, I'd probably get 3 or 4 years through, be doing quite well, and in comes the hitman and he kills you. So that's my number 29 game, Bugsy. My number 28 game is Wheelie. Wheelie was released in 1983 by Microsphere, and it's kind of a strange mix between a platform game and a racing game. The backstory is that you've wandered into some weird park, and as you go in, the gates slam shut and you've got to avoid all kinds of obstacles and get to the Ghost Rider at the end. When you get to the Ghost Rider, he challenges you to a race, and you've got to beat him back to the end, otherwise, that's it, game over, it's curtains. To complicate matters, there are all kinds of baddies and evil beasts on the way to the Ghost Rider that you've got to avoid. The good thing is that once you get to him, they all run away scared. There's also fuel that you need to manage. And a long time ago, when I was doing playing tips on the Spectrum show, I did playing tips for this game and pointed out that actually what you can do is go really, really slowly and you hardly use any fuel. I do like to use that technique sometimes. There's no need to absolutely fly through the game until you get to the Ghost Rider. One thing I've found with games is that patience is quite often a virtue. If you're willing to just take your time and not rush in where angels fear to tread, then that normally gives you a bit of an advantage in the game. And this game has a strange contrast in that going slowly until you get to the Ghost Rider is the thing to do. Then once you get to him, you need to absolutely fly back. Of course, in flying back, you will quickly run out of fuel. So you need to carefully use the fuel that you get. Now sometimes it's really good, sometimes the fuel is really conveniently placed, so you come into some screens and it's easy to get to. Sometimes you have to take a really convoluted route. And sometimes I think the best tactic in this game is to think, I'm not even going to go for the fuel, I'm just going to keep on going, and when I run out I'll lose a life, I'll take that lost life, and then I'll just continue on to the end. This game has a password system, so when you start a game you can put a password in to get to the later levels. And I remember magazines like Crash would publish the passwords for lots of the later levels in their playing tips sections. I must admit, these days I only ever play the first level, the bouncing hedgehogs. They're not too difficult, they're quite easy to predict. Later on you get bees and other things that are much harder to avoid. Other obstacles include cars and buses that you've got to jump over. The routes that you've got to take are kind of obstacles too. There are thin lines that are ramps that you can go up or not, depending on whether you're pressing up or down. Also, if you descend a ramp too quickly, you come off your motorbike. I guess that would happen in real life, or maybe not. There's also ice that you have to take really slowly, and you can't brake while you're on the ice, otherwise you'll just skid off. I really enjoyed this game from the first moment I played it. It is quite tricky. When you first pick up and play this game, it is tricky to get into. There's a learning curve to it, quite a steep learning curve. But once you've played a few games and you've got into it and you realise that not tearing around as fast as you possibly can is the way to go, then it's pretty good. I must admit, although I talk about patience being a virtue, one of the things that gets me about this game is it always seems a long way to the Ghost Rider. You go through screen after screen after screen, and it just seems to take ages to get to the Ghost Rider sometimes. And then sometimes you get to him and you're trying to get past him and it's difficult, and you wish you had a bit further to get back. So I guess the balance is right. It's well worth playing. If you haven't played this, pick it up and play it. As I say, there's a bit of a steep learning curve, probably take you a bit to get into, but it is an absolutely terrific game. With it being an early game, I'm guessing this is one I used to play with my cousin. I think it was on a cover tape as well, and I might have had it from a cover tape later on. I remember coming back to it later in the Spectrum's life. And it was certainly one of the games I remembered when I started with emulation. When I started emulating the Spectrum and playing games again in the 90s and 2000s, this was one of the ones I would have gone back to. So that's my number 28 game, Wheelie. My number 27 game is Lunar Jetman. Lunar Jetman was released in 1983 by Ultimate Play the Game and was written by the Stamper Brothers. It is, of course, the follow-up to Jetpack. It expanded greatly on Jetpack to such an extent that in the Crash review of this game they gave it 100% for value for money. I'm not sure if any other game ever got 100% for value for money in Crash, but that's pretty good going. I can't remember seeing a lot of 100% for anything in Crash for any of the game reviews. It got into the high 90s sometimes, but 100% was pretty much unprecedented. And I guess it does show how much this game built on Jetpack. In Jetpack you have a single screen, in Lunar Jetman you have a scrolling landscape. In Jetpack your only piece of equipment is your jetpack. In Lunar Jetman you have various things, bombs, teleports, your lunar rover of course, which gives you a supply of fuel and also gives you a supply of these little bridge things that you can put over any holes in the landscape. And this is also a level-based game, not in the same way that Jetpack was, where you just go from one level to the next, but where the game becomes increasingly more difficult as you play it. The story goes that Jetman, having built his rickety old spaceship in Jetpack, was trying to get back home, and unfortunately he goes and crash lands on an undiscovered alien world where the aliens of that world are intent on blowing up the Earth. In a way, it was quite lucky for us Earthlings that Jetman actually landed on this uninhabited planet and put a stop to these aliens destroying the Earth. Although, given how incredibly difficult this game can become at higher levels, I'm surprised they didn't just destroy the Earth straight away. And I think for me, that's the only gripe I have about this game. It does get really, really difficult. In fact, it's really difficult from the outset. If I had to pin it down to one thing, I think the problem with this game is that it gives you a limited fuel supply and you've got to go back to your lunar rover to replenish that fuel supply. Basically, what you have to do over and over again, actually, it does also become quite repetitive, is load your bomb onto the back of your lunar rover, find the alien base and drop the bomb on the base, rinse and repeat. There's a time limit for how long you have to do this, and if you don't beat the time limit, 2 missiles are launched, one heading to Earth and the other heading to your lunar rover. You can destroy the missile by hitting it enough times with laser fire. However, that normally proves to be pretty difficult, especially in later levels. There is another way to destroy the missile, by doing something that I call manning the missile. To man the missile, what you have to do is deliberately crash Jetman into the missile, losing a life, but also destroying the missile at the same time. While that's a pretty desperate move, it's preferable to the missile crashing into your lunar rover and turning it into what looks like a snowflake, or a bunch of snowflakes, completely destroying it and ending the game. This does have the usual arcade polish of an Ultimate game though. Jetman looks terrific, the aliens look terrific, the scrolling is really, really smooth. And at the time that this came out, Ultimate were producing the very, very best games for the Spectrum. I don't think it was until probably a year or so later that the rest of the competition for the Spectrum market caught up. If only the Stamper brothers had thought, you know what, let's not give poor Jetman a limited fuel supply, let's make sure he's got infinite fuel as he had in Jetpack. I must admit, the first time I played this game and realised I had a limited fuel supply, it was a bit disheartening. It is worth playing again now. If you want to play it, you can play it on Rare Replay for the Xbox One. You can download it and it is part of the games in that compilation. I think it's worth it. I think the Rare Replay compilation is well worth it. It's £20 for a collection of incredibly good games. You can get hours and hours and hours of fun and gameplay out of just Banjo-Kazooie, to be honest with you. But it's worth playing this game if you do get that. I certainly wouldn't have bought the compilation just for this game. While it was difficult back in the day, I found it even harder to play with the Xbox One controller. So that's my number 27 game, Lunar Jetman. My number 26 game is Xeno. Xeno was released in 1986 by A&F Software, and among other releases came as part of the 20 game pack from Comet. My best friend at the time, Lee Fryer, got a +2 from Comet for Christmas. Must have been Christmas 1986. It was probably about that time. And he got this game as part of the 20 game pack with it. Now, there was a lot of dross on that 20 game pack, but there were a few good games, but this really was the standout game. And I remember we'd spend hours in Lee's bedroom, hunched over his +2, one on one side of the keyboard, one on the other side of the keyboard, playing Xeno, seeing who could win. Because in these days of competitive esports, I don't think there was any better esports ever been invented than Xeno. This has to be one of the best and yet most unknown two-player games ever to have existed. Forget Street Fighter 2, forget multiplayer GoldenEye, forget any other competitive game you've ever played against other people, and just have a game of Xeno. It is absolutely superb. The game is kind of a strange take on maybe hockey, or even air hockey or something like that. There is a ball in the middle of the pitch to start with, and you control a puck, a kind of flattened sphere. And the way you control this is you move some crosshairs, and when you move them, a line moves out from the crosshairs to your puck. And the longer that line, the faster you move when you press the fire key. So the line is like a piece of elastic that you're stretching out, and then you let go of your puck and it flies towards the crosshairs. When your puck makes contact with something, the sides of the pitch or the ball, then both the puck and if it's the ball will move. Now I have seen reviews and comments of this game where they say, hold on, this doesn't really obey physics, some of the angles are wrong. And while that's true, actually that's a big help. I think that was done on purpose. There's a way you can bounce in the corner that actually moves you parallel to the wall of the walls that you're bouncing against. Now that would never happen in real life. But when you do that in this game, it is actually a really, really powerful defensive move that can save you from having a goal scored against you. In fact, I think perfecting that move is one of the things you have to master to get really, really good at this game. Now, when I used to play with Lee, I think what used to happen is, to begin with, I think he had the game, so he had it and he'd beat me, and I kind of got it and played it for a bit, and then I got good and would win a few games, and then Lee would get good and win a few games. Probably overall, because he actually had the game first, that's my excuse. I think Lee probably won more games than I did over the course of us playing, but we used to have some really, really good competitive games on this. I've said a few times before in reviews and things like that, but some games are good because of their simplicity. They're a really, really simple premise, but that leads to really, really deep gameplay. And with this game, that's really, really true. It has simple gameplay. I mean, there's not a lot to it, but it can be a really deep game. The tactics involved in beating your component, where you put your puck in relation to theirs, sometimes actually the best tactic is to smash into your opponent, not smash into the ball. And mastering things like that is how you master this game, and those deeper tactics all come into play. And they aren't things that the computer does when you play against them, so you only get better by playing against human opponents when it gets to a certain point. I think I remember reading something similar about Match Day, which I've never actually played. And the great thing about this, and the reason why I call it an e-sport, is it's kind of a sports game where the sports game itself could never exist in reality. I reviewed this game for the Spectrum show a year or so ago, and I remember saying that this would make a really good modern remake. You can imagine playing this game on a mobile phone, where you're actually using a touch screen to define how far your puck goes. One thing I must mention that I haven't so far is that there is also a variable timeout on how long you've got to position your crosshairs before your puck will just automatically move. And that also can add a real depth to the game. Tuning that so it's just the right length is quite key. If it's too short, the game becomes a bit random and anarchic. If it's too long, the game becomes more of a strategy game where you're trying to outthink your opponent with your next move because you've got a lot of time. Whereas somewhere in the middle, you need to think quick, get your move right. I always think about 4 seconds is the right length for that timeout. Although that was when I was younger. Being older now, it'll probably have to be longer. Now, when I got into emulation, I used to play this with friends at university. So in the early 90s, when emulators first came about, I played this game in the early 90s. It was one of the first I went to. And I had one particular group of friends that used to practice for a while, practice against the computer, then each other, and go, right, we'll play you now, and try and play me. And I always beat them. I remember quite a few months ago, some friends came over to stay, and it was a couple and their children, and I was playing this game with Steve from the couple. And we started a few games, and once he got the hang of it, we were playing, and he started to get really, really competitive. And every time I beat him, he'd start a new game immediately. And it got to the point where his wife was saying, I'm going now without you, Stephen. And she'd got the kids in the car, loaded all their things into the car, and was actually just ready to go, and he was still starting another game. That just shows how addictive this game is. And this was someone who'd never played it before. I'm actually starting to think this game should have been even higher in the list. It really is terrific. It's really good against a human opponent. It's not bad against the computer, but you'll soon learn to beat the computer. So that's my number 26 game, Xeno. My number 25 game is Jet Set Willy 2. Jet Set Willy 2 was released in 1985 by Software Projects, just in time for Christmas. Software Projects had been hoping for a game from Matthew Smith, but he wasn't able to deliver. So Derek P. Rawson stepped in and converted the conversion he'd made for Jet Set Willy 2 for the BBC, I think it was, back to the Spectrum. Now, in that toing and froing of conversion then reconversion, a few things happened. The first thing is the mansion became much, much bigger. The mansion in Jet Set Willy is a lot bigger, and what the backstory says is there were some builders that Jet Set Willy got in to do up his mansion, And when they left, they'd done a lot more work than he thought they were going to. And he gets home and Maria says, tidy up after these builders. So that's your reason for picking up all of the items that are lying around in the mansion this time. In adding to the mansion, Derek did a few things. One, he kind of filled in all the gaps that were in the old mansion. So in the old Jet Set Willy mansion, there were places where the rooms didn't stack up. There were more rooms above ground than below ground, for example. So the below ground rooms obviously had some filler in. There were some kind of leaps that you had to do to get to the right place. So from the Forgotten Abbey all the way through to Under the Drive, for example, is a lot fewer rooms than if you had to go from the rooms above all the way through to the drive. The other thing is the game engine itself changed. So there's a few little subtle things to do with the way you jump. In particular, if you jump in Jet Set Willy after a previous jump holding a direction key, you take one step in that direction before you jump. That helps in some places, but in others makes things a little bit harder. Now, a technique I often use in Jet Set Willy is to do a standing jump then a jump so that you get your jump pixel perfect. What this means in Jet Set Willy 2 is you need to do that standing jump 1 pixel previous to where you want to jump from. Another difference to Jet Set Willy is that there are 175 items that you can possibly collect in this game. But to complete the game, you only need to pick up 150. Now, there are some really difficult to collect items in this game, and some areas of the game that are really difficult to get to. And a while ago, I completed this game, and when I completed it, I worked out which were the items I thought I could get, and made sure that they would add up to 150. Then I just got those and didn't get any of the others. And I remember the first time I tried it with save states first. So I planned out my route, did it with save states to get to my 150 items. And after I'd done it, I'd gone all the way around, I ended up with 149. I actually had to go back and replan and add one extra object in. That extra object, I think, was in the Highway to Hell, which is the room that's now above the entrance to Hades. If you drop down where the entrance to Hades is in Jet Set Willy 2, you come to the Highway to Hell, and dropping down that brings you to the entrance to Hades. I bought this game, I bought it and I played it to death. We used to play for ages. I used to play it with my cousins actually, and we used to have missions. I remember when we first got it and took it to their house, we had missions of where to get to, just to explore the map. I mean, the game was that big and could be that difficult that we had certain missions, and I think one of us went into space, one of us went underground, and the other one tried to get through the garden, which we found was a really difficult route. And it is very difficult to get through. When I planned out my route to complete this game, I made sure that I didn't have to go through the garden. And I remember my cousin getting through the garden eventually after numerous attempts, and then there's just the off-license at the other side, which was a bit of a letdown. But there's 12 items in the off-license, so leaving that out when you complete it means that you have to get a lot of the other ones. Now, if I'd have done this game a while ago, before I did my kind of Minor Willy trio, before I completed Manic Miner, then Jet Set Willy, then Jet Set Willy 2, I think it would have been lower in the list. And like Jet Set Willy, this was a game I really came to like and enjoy as I was working out how to complete the game. It takes a lot of time and patience to complete this game, and there are nuances in it that you really start to realise when you take that much time over the game. And like Jet Set Willy, which I'd always really liked and been really fond of, but I didn't rate particularly highly. This too, I came to rate much higher. I particularly like the space section. It's great going into space and your sprite changes, you become a spaceman. I never realised for a long time that the rooms in space actually form the Starship Enterprise. Or an approximation to it anyway. There is one thing I would say about this. Some of the rooms that are really difficult in Jet Set Willy are easier in Jet Set Willy 2. Under the Drive being one that's much easier in Jet Set Willy 2. As I say, I did do a walkthrough of this game. I completed it. I've only ever completed it once though. And what's difficult is you can't complete this and complete Jet Set Willy. The differences in the game, well I couldn't. The differences in the game engine make it a lot harder to do. If you're tuned into one game, it's very hard to go to the other game and get tuned into that game as well. Another notable difference between this and Jet Set Willy is that I don't think the new sprites are as good as Matthew Smith's original sprites in a lot of cases. There are some good ones. I like the butler in the butler's pantry. He looks good. But that's the only one I can think of now that really stands out as being in keeping with Matthew Smith's sprites.
I'm sure there are others, but it's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. Some of the rooms just don't look quite right and don't look as good as Matthew Smith rooms. But that's a small criticism. It's still well worth playing. So that's my number 25 game, Jet Set Willy 2.
My number 24 game is Doomstalk's Revenge. Doomstalk's Revenge was released in 1984 by Beyond Software and was written by Mike Singleton. From memory, it was released for Christmas 1984. And the funny thing is, Christmas 1984, I got The Lords of Midnight. I'd heard about The Lords of Midnight and I'd pestered my parents for ages, and he must have had a hard time getting it. I think it must have been quite hard to find The Lords of Midnight because that had been released quite a few months before and Doomstalk's Revenge had come out in time for Christmas. And in interviews and subsequent interviews after it was released, Mike Singleton did admit that Doomstalk's Revenge was a little bit rushed for Christmas. And I'm probably going to start with my criticisms of this game because I think you could tell it was rushed. Doomstalk's Revenge was supposed to be bigger and better than The Lords of Midnight, and I think what happened is it turned out to be bigger, but that wasn't necessarily better. All of the names of the lords and the plains and the forests were procedurally generated in Doomstalk's Revenge. In The Lords of Midnight, you got incredibly good names for places: the Forest of Dreams, the Plains of Despair, the Mountains of Doom. With Doomstalk's Revenge, that didn't happen. You got really obscure names, weird names, and there seemed to be no rhyme or reason to them. The name of an Ice Lord could be really, really similar to the name of a Fae or the name of a Barbarian. And for those who haven't played the game, the Fae and the Barbarians were pretty much the good guys and on your side, whereas the Ice Lords were on the enemy's side. The other thing I've never really liked about Doomstalk's Revenge is the AI. It does seem that the inhabitants of Icemark are on some kind of genocidal mission where they all want to kill every single other inhabitant of the world. Now that makes for quite a dynamic game, and people who like this game, people who prefer this game to The Lords of Midnight, say the problem with The Lords of Midnight is it's always the same. It's pretty much always the same game every time you play. Whereas Doomstalk's Revenge, you get a new game every time, you don't know what's going to happen, and that's the challenge. I agree that The Lords of Midnight was very limited in its AI, but I think, if anything, Doomstalk's Revenge is too open. Maybe if Mike Singleton had a little bit longer and a little bit longer to tweak the AI, it could have been a so much better game. And I was disappointed in this game when it came out. The previous game in this list was a sequel. This game's a sequel. The distance between those two sequels in the list overall is bigger for Doomstalk's Revenge and Lords of Midnight than it is for Jet Set Willy and Jet Set Willy 2. And while Jet Set Willy 2 wasn't really a great sequel to Jet Set Willy, it was still a very, very good game. I was disappointed with Doomstalk's Revenge when I got it and first started playing it, and that's why I think it isn't higher in this list. Really, it should have been. If it was the game that had done justice to the Lords of Midnight itself, then I think it would have been higher in this list. It's still really high in this list, and it's actually still a good game, and I had hours and hours of enjoyment out of the game. When I first bought this game, I bought it after Christmas. I'd saved up pocket money, I think, for a few weeks after Christmas, because it was a £10 game, and that was quite a lot of money at the time. And I bought this game, and it was actually it was a last chicken in the shop type thing. It was this old battered copy, but it was the only one I could get my hands on. And I bought it, and it had a really, really quick speed load on it. So the speed load was really temperamental, and it wouldn't load. And the other thing is, the tape quality didn't seem to be that good, and it degraded quite quickly. So after buying the game, I didn't actually get to play it that many times. I'd load it up and I'd play for hours and hours and hours, but after only a month or so, the tape became a bit unreliable to load, and I have to try 5 or 6 times to get it to load to just get one game. And I remember the last game I ever played on that tape was when I read in Crash Tape Playing Tips that there was a really, really easy way to get the ultimate victory. Going back to what I said before about the inhabitants of Icemark being hell-bent on mutual genocide, all you have to do is hide the characters in the tunnel for a while, and someone will go along and stick their sword in Shoreth the Heartstealer, who's the baddie in the game. And then if you wait even a bit longer, the rest of the inhabitants will pretty much wipe each other out anyway. And all you have to do at that point is come out of the tunnels, journey up north, get Morkin, go back to the Gate of Arathorn, And there you go, you get the ultimate victory. And that's exactly what I did the final time I played this game off that tape. Then years later, Crash Issue 93 had this as a cover tape game. And I bought that issue just for Doomstalk's Revenge, for nothing other than Doomstalk's Revenge. And that didn't have the speed load and loaded a lot more reliably, and I really got back into it then. And I think it was only then that I managed to appreciate some of the improvements over the Lords of Midnight. The first one was that if you capture a city or a fortress, then that city or fortress will produce troops of your kind. And one of the things I'd never been able to get over when I'd first played the game was the fact that Luxor's troops quickly become deplenished and there's nowhere to recruit Moongod. So one of the first jobs I think you've got to do in this game if you're playing it for the long term, if you're trying to win a military victory, is actually find somewhere for Luxor to take and give him a home base to be able to replenish his troops. The next thing I think I came to appreciate is the AI. While it's very, very limited, it's pretty simple actually. It's a very simple algorithm. I do like the way it gives you a different game every time, and you've really got to think. It becomes much more of a strategy game rather than a puzzle game. Now, I like both, but it's a bit more like Advanced Wars. If you play Advanced Wars, it's not like the Lords of Midnight. The troops in Advanced Wars don't do exactly the same thing every time. They react to what you do. And the characters and armies in Doomstalk's Revenge kind of do react to what you do. I should, of course, mention the backstory to Doomstalk's Revenge. After Doomstalk's been defeated, all of the armies of the Free and the Fair gather at the Citadel of Dreams. I won't go into the full details, but basically Tarathel, the daughter of the Lord of Dreams, and Morkin, who's of course Luxor the Moon Prince's son, fall in love and are going to be married. Unfortunately, Sharath, Doomstalk's daughter, who in Doomstalk's final breath he has to take revenge, is really annoyed at the Moon Prince. While it is for killing her father, she doesn't want revenge because of that. She wants revenge because he got to kill him rather than her. So she spirits Morkin away and makes him her slave. Tarathel realizes this and she sets out after Morkin. And then Rothron and Luxor also realize this and set off after them. So this game's set in the icy world of Icemark, which is to the north of Midnight. And when you get to Icemark, basically you find there are 5 different races. There are Ice Lords, which are loyal to Sharath, but can be persuaded to join Luxor's cause. Giants, who are kind of the next evil race. Again, they can be persuaded to join Luxor, but it's harder than some of the other races. Dwarves, who are kind of in the middle, although I always liked dwarves. I always liked recruiting as many dwarves as I could. Barbarians and Fae, and the Barbarians and Fae tend to be the easiest to recruit, and you start with Tarathel in the land of the Fae and Luxor and Rothron in the land of the Barbarians. I don't know what happened to Corolith out of the Lords of Midnight. Either he was supposed to be killed during that game, although mostly when I played the Lords of Midnight, Corolith's one of the few to survive. Or he just couldn't be bothered to help his old mate. Maybe he was a bit tired after all the fighting in Midnight. It is possible to play this game now via quite a few different mediums. A few years ago, Chris Wilde got together with Mike Singleton and they released updated versions of Doomstalk's Revenge and the Lords of Midnight for iOS. If you like these games and you like the originals, that's well worth seeking out. One of the things I always think is that someone new coming to these games now, because of the time it takes to get into them, and actually this probably the simplicity of the game, I think it's very hard to get into games like this if you come back to them and you've never played them before. They are brilliant games, they're really good, but things have just moved on. I do still play them now occasionally. There were conversions done for the GBA, and you can probably still get them online somewhere, and that is a good way to play them. So that's my number 24 game, Doomstalk's Revenge. My number 23 game is Harrier Attack. Harrier Attack was released in 1983 by Jarrell. Jarrell did half release some good games for the Spectrum, didn't they? They weren't quite as good as Ultimate, but when you got a Jarrell game, you pretty much knew you were getting a very good game. This is one of those games that's 16K and surprises you that it is 16K. It was released in 1983 when the 16K Spectrum was still going strong-ish. And is a Scramble clone. Well, I think it's a Scramble clone anyway. You fly your Harrier over a scrolling landscape from left to right, having to blow up ground defences until you eventually come to a city or a town where you've got to bomb the town, then return to your aircraft carrier and land. In both the landscape and the town sections, there are defences. Now, unlike Scramble, there aren't missiles that launch up at you, but these defences kind of shoot shrapnel into the air. And if you fly through too much of this shrapnel, your plane will explode. Now, the thing about this game is, I've never worked out how much shrapnel you're allowed to fly through. I think it's something to do with the level of the game that you choose, the level of difficulty that you choose at the start. So you can choose between difficulties 1 and 5 when you first start the game. And I must admit, I always used to play this on level 3. When I play it now, I play it on level 1, just to make things nice and easy. The only obvious notable difference between the levels is that the landscape section is actually quite a bit higher, so you've got less room for manoeuvrability in level 5, or as the levels increase it gets higher. Now, while there aren't any missiles shooting up from the ground, there are enemy planes that will fly in and attack you if you fly too high. And that kind of gives you two strategies. You can either hug the ground so that the planes don't come and try and blow you up, or you can fly a bit higher and meet those planes head on and try and blow them up. When I first played this game, I always used to do the hugging the ground. Then later on I decided, come on, let's shoot these planes. You get a lot more points for shooting the planes, so you may as well go up and shoot the planes with your rockets. You get two armaments in this game. You've got rockets and bombs. They're pretty self-explanatory and of course very similar to what you get in the game Scramble, which is why I really think this is a Scramble clone. I did note that Paul Jenkinson's, when he did his review of Scramble clones for the Spectrum, missed out Harrier Attack, which surely would have been the winner, because this is an absolutely excellent game. Britain had been at war with Argentina over the Falkland Islands in 1992, and I'm sure that was something of an inspiration for this game. Although, given that the Falkland Islands was a British colony, I'm not sure that bombing the city in the Falkland Islands would have been the best thing to do. Now, I can't remember where I got this game from. I knew that I had the original. I can remember having the box with that Harrier picture on the front that's also reproduced on the loading screen. But I can't particularly remember buying it. I can never remember buying it or getting it as a present, either a Christmas present or a birthday present or anything like that. I may have saved up pocket money and bought it with pocket money. And maybe I got it in one of those bargain bins that you used to get. I did get a lot of games out of those. I quickly learned that one of the best things to do is work out what the kind of better games from a few months ago were and wait for them to come into the bargain bins and be a bit cheaper. It was definitely early on as well. It was in 1984 I had this game. I distinctly remember playing it in 1984, but I just don't remember where it came from. One of the really nice touches on this game is that when the game finally loads, there's kind of an effect on the loading screen where the great big Harrier that is on the loading screen shoots some missiles out from its guns. Well, at the time was really, really cool and pretty much unprecedented, and I can't remember a lot of games that did anything like that. There were some animated loading screens and things that happened with the loading screens, but certainly for an early 16K game, that was pretty much unprecedented. I say this a lot in this list, but this really is a game I'd encourage people to play now. You can download it from the World of Spectrum website. Just download it, get an emulator and have a play. If you've never played it before, put it on level 1, don't ramp the difficulty up too high and just have some fun. You'll probably crash into the sea or crash into something the first few times you play, but you'll soon get the hang of it. It's a lovely little game and well worth downloading and playing. So that's my number 23 game, Harrier Attack. My number 22 game is Back to School. Back to School was released in 1985 by Microsphere. I don't know what it is, but this section of this list seems to be populated by sequels that weren't quite as good as the original. We've had Jet Set Willy 2, we've had Doomstalk's Revenge, and now we've got Back to School. Once again, Back to School tried to be bigger and better than School Days, and I think fell just slightly short. I think the perfect school game would have been somewhere between School Days and Back to School. Not quite as convoluted as Back to School, but not quite as simple as School Days. I bought this game pretty much as soon as it came out and played it for hours and hours and hours. I absolutely loved this, and in the same way that a lot of people play Back to School, just running around and doing things, I did that with Back to School for a long time. And even to this day, I have never completed this game. I have practiced it for a bit, and I do want, at some point, do a walkthrough of this game where I do complete it. But there is just so much to do that I've never managed to do it. And like School Days, if you go and watch my walkthrough of School Days, you'll hear me saying that actually completing the game becomes a bit boring. It's more fun going around and causing havoc than it is completing the game. Because to some extent, to complete the game, what you've got to do is make sure that you keep your nose clean and don't do anything too naughty. And the whole appeal of these games was you could run riot at school in a way that you couldn't and wouldn't at real school. Once again, you play Eric, and you've got to get the report that you stole in School Days back into the head safe. Unfortunately, over the school holidays, a lot has changed in your school. For a start, there's a girls' school now attached to your school. And with the girls' school comes a girlfriend. There's a girl named Haley that basically you can kiss, and when you kiss her, she takes lines off you. In School Days, Eric really only had his trusty catapult to do anything with. In Back to School, you get so many more things. You get a water pistol, stink bombs, you can capture mice and frogs. And all of these things are essential if you're going to complete the game. This game is very reminiscent of School Days. There are some very familiar things. So you still have to knock things onto teachers' heads to get codes, which you write on blackboards, for example. There are a load of new things, of course, some of which I've already mentioned. You get a bike to ride once you've got the code to unlock the chain. There are flowers, amazingly strong flowers, that once you shoot with your water pistol and they start to grow, you can then stand on and it will raise you up. There's a janitor who you've got to knock a conker off a tree onto his head to knock out. Now, I always felt a bit bad about doing that. The janitor seems okay. He never really does anything bad. He doesn't give you lines, for example. He never tells on you. He just goes about his business. So I did feel a little bit guilty about knocking him out with the conker, although that was always my downfall in this game. There's one part of the game where you have to do that to progress. And blimey, that bit's difficult. And I guess that brings me back to my previous criticism. There's just a bit too much in this game. It's a little bit too convoluted. And I think that's why I've never completed it. As I say, I still spent a lot of time playing this game and got a lot of enjoyment from it, even though I didn't complete it. The game did improve on a few of the more annoying aspects of School Days too. To start with, you don't have to go through endless games writing down the dates of battles so that you can find Mr. Creek's birthday to complete this game. For anyone who's played School Days, they'll know that is a welcome change. Next, you were able to write on any blackboard. It didn't have to be clean. Finding a clean blackboard was a bit of a pain in School Days, and the codes could be written in any order. I remember spending ages and ages looking for a clean blackboard in School Days and then trying to guess the right order of the code that I collected from the teachers. Going back to it now, it is still really enjoyable to play. I really like getting it back out and playing it for this review. There is a bug in the game that I hadn't seen until I got it back out to play for it, where if you go to a certain point in the game to the left-hand side into the toilets, I think it is, the game scrolls all the way to the right under certain circumstances. I was a bit surprised that I'd never seen that before. So that's my number 22 game, Back to School. My number 21 game is Daley Thompson's Decathlon. Daley Thompson's Decathlon was released in 1984 by Ocean and was a huge game for that Christmas. I don't know how many copies Ocean sold, but I'm sure they sold loads and loads and loads in Christmas 1984. Must have been hundreds of thousands. I got the game that Christmas along with a QuickShot 2 joystick and a Turbo RAM interface. Or is it RAM Turbo interface? And I also got one of my best ever games that Christmas, Lords of Midnight. But Daley Thompson's Decathlon was so good, it kept me off the Lords of Midnight for quite a few weeks. Probably until that QuickShot 2 broke. Because Daley Thompson's Decathlon is one of those sports games, what I like to call a joystick waggler. Now let's just say a few words about the great Daley Thompson. Daley Thompson won gold in the 1980 and 1984 Olympics and was an absolute hero. He also won gold medals at the Helsinki World Championships, loads of European Championships and loads of Commonwealth Games as well. And of course was a really nice fun guy. He used to wear funny t-shirts and things like that when he was getting his medals. And he used to whistle the national anthem as well, which I think some parts of the press probably didn't like, but I always thought was really, really funny. This game reproduces all 10 events of the decathlon and is split over day 1 and day 2. Day 1 on one side of the cassette, day 2 on the other side of the cassette. One of the things I always think about this game is it's funny that Ocean got away with basically putting 3 identical games in the long jump, shot put and javelin into this game. Basically you just waggle your joystick up to a line, press a button until you hit a certain angle and then release it and jump or throw. There's no real difference between those 3 events and what you do. That's a very small criticism though. This was a really, really good game and I guess would be classed as a hypersports clone. So day 1 starts with the 100 meters where you just waggle a joystick as fast as you can to get from the left hand of the screen to the right hand of the screen in as little time as possible. You start with 3 lives and each event has a qualifying time or distance that if you meet, you go on to the next event unscathed. If you don't meet, you lose a life. And if you've still got lives left, you still go on to the next event. After the 100 meters comes the long jump, where, as I said, you just wiggle a joystick up to a line, get an angle and jump. There is a bug in the game with a long jump where if you jump just over the line, you've got to time it right so you just land over the line, then you get a really, really long score. Next comes the shot put, and as I've already said, that is identical to the long jump. Next comes one of the more technical events in the game, the high jump. Now I really like the high jump because it's a bit different. Firstly, you don't have to waggle your joystick, you just give it a few pushes to start off and Daley automatically runs, but then you've got to time your jump so you jump close enough to the bar so that you will go over. Then you kind of have to use your angles, you've got to time your angles again so that you kind of flop over the bar just at the right time. And how you and when you do that does depend on where you took off. There's quite a bit of skill in this game. Next comes the 400 meters, which is probably the most grueling event in the entire game. 4 times longer than the 100 meters, so 4 times more joystick waggling. And then you get the Olympic Anthem, and you can either reset your spectrum and pop in day 2, or you can start again with 100 meters. But this time, the next time round, all of the qualifying times and distances get harder. And they just keep getting harder and harder and harder. The first event in day 2 is the 110 meters hurdles. Very similar to the 100 meters, you've got to waggle your joystick, but this time you've got to press fire and time it just right to jump over the hurdles, and that's actually pretty difficult. Next comes the discus, and this is a bit more unique. You have to time throwing the discus just right, so that Daley is spinning fast enough and facing in the right direction. This actually can be pretty difficult. You've also got to keep the fire button pressed for the right amount of time to get a good angle in the discus. And as anyone who's played these games knows, 45 degrees is the perfect angle to get. If I was ever going to have trouble with one event, it would be the discus. The discus is pretty tricky. The amount of times I've done 3 throws into the netting at the back of the circle rather than throwing it out the front of the circle. Next comes the pole vault, which is pretty similar in ways to the high jump. No joystick waggling in the pole vault, you just set Daley off and you've got to time putting the pole down just right. Then you hold your fire button and you've got to release it just at the right time to vault over the bar. Quite technical and quite tricky, the pole vault. I always enjoyed the pole vault. In fact, thinking back to it now and looking at the events, I think I preferred day 2 to day 1. Certainly when I got better at the game, day 2's a little bit more challenging. Next, there's the Javelin, another run up to the line and throw event. And finally, there's the 1500 meters. And thank God Ocean decided not to make the 1500 meters a joystick waggler. Instead, you have a certain amount of energy that you've got to manage throughout the race. So you can start off running pretty quickly, but as the race goes on, you tire and the rate that your energy depletes quickens.
So the general tactic seems to be you can start quite fast, but then you've got to slowly move down how quickly you're running. And at the end, you can do a bit of a sprint with your final energy and hope you make it over the line. I must admit that I've timed that wrong on occasions and not managed to get over the line. And as with day one, if you successfully get through all of the events, you get the Olympic Anthem, and then you get harder qualifying times and distances for the next time you go round. I'm sure many a joystick was broken playing this game. I did find a kind of cheat with the joystick. You could redefine the keys and make the keys for left just be the left of the joystick. Right, I used to do as the fire button on my Quickshot 2, and the Quickshot 2 had a rapid fire control. And what I realised is, if I put my rapid fire control as one of the directions, then I could just tap the joystick in one direction, not particularly fast, and put the rapid fire on, and I'd run really, really, really fast. You could then use a button on the keyboard for your fire button, and you'd be able to get some really, really fast times or long distances. So you'd be able to get to maximum speed on the long jump and the shot put and the javelin before throwing, and just use the keyboard as the fire button to get the right angle. It could make the 110 metre hurdles pretty tricky, but I think if you did that, you ran so fast that for the first qualifying day, you could just run through all the hurdles and you'd still beat the qualifying time. Going back to it now, it's still actually pretty good fun. I really like playing this. I like playing it again for this. I sometimes play it just for the fun of it. And I do still like day 2. I still find the 110 metres hurdles really, really tricky, and the discus really, really tricky. But it is a bit different to day 1, and there's a lot more challenge in it. So that's my number 21 game, Daley Thompson's Decathlon. And that's my top 100 Spectrum games numbers 30 to 21. At 30, we had Trans Am, 29, Mugsy, 28, Wheelie, 27, Jetman, 26, Xeno, 25, Jet Set Willy 2, 24, Doomstalk's Revenge, 23, Harrier Attack, 22, Back to School, and 21, Daley Thompson's Decathlon. Until next time, happy gaming!